Criminal defense attorney Ashley Merchant joins me now on the telephone to talk about this. Ashley, thanks so much. Now, it didn't take the jury very long to come to a decision. Walk us through the counts and how they were able to make this decision so quickly.
You know, I don't think it would take very long at all because they had to vote on a foreman, vote on a foreperson, and then they probably had to use the restroom. They wanted to see this evidence again. They wanted to see the actual testimony of him as to which people he believed he shot. And I think that shows that it's a very conscientious jury who's actually going through the charges and wants to make sure that they get it right, wants to make sure that they actually evaluate each and every charge for each and every individual to make sure that they got all of these counts right. I'm not surprised that it didn't take very long because, I mean, essentially he confessed. And essentially his defense lawyer said in closing arguments that he did it, that he was guilty. They're really much more focused on the next phase, the penalty phase of this case.
And speaking of that penalty phase, Ashley, the sentencing doesn't start until January. Why is the judge waiting? Why not do it now?
You know, I understand that because the court system really shuts down over the holiday season. You've got a lot of jurors who have travel plans, and so it's really out of consideration for the jurors, for the folks that are involved, the court staff, you know, people that have holiday plans, people that have things like that, because this is really a trial within a trial, and the penalty phase could take weeks. I've actually had cases where the death penalty trial was much shorter than the penalty phase. So it actually may end up taking more time. And so the fact that he's waiting until January is not surprising at all, really, given the amount of time that this could take in consideration for all of the folks that are involved.
Ashley, were you surprised? Well, let me put it this way. It was, I think, unbelievable to a lot of people that the family members of the victims, in many instances, did not and do not want to see Dylann Roof executed for his crimes. I think a lot of people feel that they are much bigger people than most of us could be. Do you think that that will play into the sentencing?
It definitely will play into the sentencing, and I think they are amazing people. I mean, the fact that they can overcome that and that they can see beyond their own sorrow and actually look deeper, and I think a lot of them are very religious people. And I think the fact that these folks, in their hearts and in their religion, morally are opposed to the death penalty, and when they lose a loved one, they can still stand by that belief. That speaks volumes, and I think that the jury is going to listen to that. I think the jury is going to hear that, and it's going to be very impactful how much the jury actually agrees with what these folks want, you know, and I mean, they're the ones that really have been the most affected by it, the family members, and the fact that they're saying, you know what, morally, we're bigger than this. Morally, the death penalty is wrong. I think that's going to carry a lot of weight with the jury. The question, though, is that there's going to be some folks that want the death penalty. And will the jury give a death sentence for those folks and then maybe spare his life on the other counts for the folks whose families don't want the death penalty? I think we could see that, where in the end, he's still getting the death sentence. If he gets it on one count, it doesn't matter if he gets it on the others, you know?
And you know, what's interesting, Ashley, is that his lawyers seem to hint that he was mentally unfit for committing these acts and even for the death penalty, but they didn't introduce a lot of evidence to support that. Why do you think that was?
You know, they tried. I mean, his attorney, David Brooke, tried to put in evidence, psychological evaluations, tried to put in mental health history, tried to put in academic records, and the judge shut him down. The judge said it wasn't relevant. And the issue really is that that information was not relevant at that stage of the trial. Whether or not he's got mental illness, that's not relevant to whether or not he was guilty or innocent. That's relevant to the next phase, which is whether or not he deserves the death penalty. And the problem that his lawyer's facing is he represented him for the guilt or innocence phase, but he's not representing him for the sentencing phase. And so his lawyer was essentially trying to get in evidence that would be relevant to the death sentence, the evidence of that mental health and the mental illness. He was trying to get that in at a time that he wasn't able to. And so, you know, he was trying to do that because that was his only shot, because Roof is not having him as his lawyer for this second phase. And so I think that we're not going to hear the evidence of his mental illness, because I think Dylann Roof does not want anybody to hear that evidence. And I think he's going to work very hard to keep that from coming to light.
Yeah, so Dylann Roof will be defending himself in the penalty phase. He defended himself this week. I mean, how do you think how is that gonna play out?
I think he's going to do one of two things. And I think that the main motivation that he has is to keep his history from coming out. I think he does not want the public to dig deep into his own personal history and his own mental illness.
But why? He's been found guilty. What is the rationale behind that?
He's been found guilty, but he probably doesn't want to be portrayed. This was a public statement. I mean, you've got to take it back to why he did this. This was a public statement. He wants this to be his racist rant. If it is excused as he was mentally ill, he suffered from a mental illness, and that's why he did this, then that undercuts his whole reasoning for doing it. And so he did this to make a statement. But if someone's allowed to say, you know what, he didn't really do it because of those reasons. He actually did it because he was mentally ill. If someone is allowed to argue that, in his mind, that's undercutting his whole purpose for doing this.
So,
and it undermines his goal. As sick as it is, it undermines his goal.
Yeah, and it absolutely is sickening. So do you envision the possibility that when he stands up to defend himself in this penalty phase, that he starts to say these horrendous and horrific things about his beliefs and why he did what he did?
I think we're going to see one of two things. I think we're either going to see that, where he stands up and he continues to utter this hate, and I think we're going to see the judge quickly shut that down, but I think that he might attempt that. Or on the flip side, I think we're going to see him be completely silent, where he puts up absolutely no defense and he just sits silent the whole time.
There's been reaction, of course, from many leaders in South Carolina. Governor Nikki Haley put out a statement. It is my hope that the survivors, the families, and the people of South Carolina can find some peace in the fact that justice has been served. This seems, and you're there. I mean, this seems to have united the entire state, but everybody around in the country in this horrific act, and now the fact that he's been found guilty. You're going to see this very swift reaction from, I think, people all over.
Oh, we needed this, and I mean, we as a society needed it. But I think that the victim's family needed it more than anything. But, the community in the South needed it. We needed this closure. We needed this hatred. We needed him to be found guilty. And so I think the healing process can start. It's unfortunate that now we have to go through a penalty phase in order, for all of this to come back up. But the government is seeking the death penalty. So that's something that has to happen. There has to be a penalty phase. But once it's all said and done, once it's over, I think then is when the community can really begin to heal.
Is there a chance that in representing himself, and as you point out, the thinking is that he doesn't want to, or he wants to avoid courtroom disclosures about his family and perhaps his psychological background, by representing himself and defending himself in the penalty phase, that he might actually avoid the death penalty?
He might actually avoid the death penalty because those things don't come out. I mean, that's the thing about death penalty juries. They're able to make an individual determination. They can base it on anything. They can base it on some glimpse of mercy that they feel in their hearts. They can base it on some moral opposition that they somehow find to the death penalty. They can base it on anything, really. And so, there's no telling by him standing silent if that will garner more sympathy than if he gets up there and goes on his racist rant. I mean, quite frankly, if those are the two options that he has, if he's trying to avoid the death penalty, being silent would probably work to his benefit. But, I think that he suffers from such strong mental illness that we don't know his motivation. We don't know if he's even, he was deemed competent, but that's a very low standard. Just because a defendant is competent doesn't mean that they actually have the mental awareness to make these rational decisions that you or I might make. So, he's just not thinking rationally. So there's no telling how he's going to behave during this trial.
The news out of Charleston, South Carolina, Dylann Roof, the radicalized, self-radicalized, some would say, young white supremacist who killed 9 black parishioners at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, has been found guilty by a federal jury on Thursday. Ashley Merchant, we thank you so much.
Thank you.